One thing to know is that brain diseases, neurological disorders are the leading source of disability in the world. So more than cancer, more than heart disease, more than infectious diseases,
did not know
neurological diseases, stroke, migraine, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease are the leading cause of disability in the world. So if you look at the world and you want to say what's causing the most of disability in the world, it's not infectious diseases, it's not cancer, it's not heart disease, it's not lung disease, it's brain diseases.
And welcome to the Darren Woodson Show. If you are watching us right now, you'll realize right off the bat that we're a little bit light today.
Yeah, we are.
So our fearless leader,
the engine
that drives us, is not able to make it today. For once, this is, I think, was the second episode he's missed. Second episode that
Ben has actually missed. Yes, and it's probably going to be his favorite right here.
That's right. That's right. And his favorite is part of the reason is because, well, we're here, but the main reason is that Dr. RayDorsey is joining us, and I'm just going to give a very quick bio because whatever I say does not do justice to your accomplishments. But Dr. Dorsey, and we're going to refer to him as Ray. He's asked us off air to refer to him as Ray because we are friends.
Ray.
And that's
I didn't want to say Ray, but that's why he said, hey, call me Ray. So,
but Ray, I think Mr. Woodson, your middle name is Ray.
It is. Yes, it is.
See, he is a researcher at heart. That is why he is solving all the problems that he's solving. We'll talk about. But Dr. Dorsey is a David M. Levy Professor of Neurology and Director of the Center for Health and Technology at the University of Rochester Medical Center. He completed his undergraduate studies at Stanford, medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, or Penn, and business school at the Wharton School. So we have two people here. We have a third co-host, and then we have a producer. And the person on the other side of that screen's mental capacity and intelligence is greater than that of those combined of this show. So just that right there.
I got another factoid. Mr. Darren Woodson, I think, had like a career high 12 tackles against my Stanford football team.
Yes.
And I think maybe he lined up against a certain Senator, Cory Booker.
Cory Booker. You're right. I never thought about that. That's right.
Work, man.
Yeah, you put your work in.
The show.
You see,
get the Stanford grad, out there.
Yeah, it takes a Stanford grad to bring me back into order of understanding exactly what's took place.
That's right.
But he mentioned Cory Booker. You mentioned names like, can you look in the '90s? It's where all the greatness was. It's just greatness. You weren't even born back then, Ty. You have no idea what was happening.
Easy.
I think, and then you probably played against Bob Whitfield too.
Bob Whitfield as well. Yeah, there's some great players in the Pac-12 back then, Pac-10 back then.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
I would say a couple other accomplishments. So he and a few of his colleagues, they are the author of the book "Ending Parkinson's Disease," and we're going to talk about a correlation between Parkinson's disease and former NFL players. Darren and I obviously having close roots to that, but he also is helping investigate new treatments for movement disorders and improve the way care is delivered for individuals with neurological disorders, and really specifically focused on Parkinson's. Really, we are so thankful for everything, that you're doing to really help eradicate and treat this disease, but also just for the time that you've taken out of that mission to join us today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Delighted and excited to be with you guys.
Awesome. So if you've listened to the show in the past, we really like to dig into the journey. You have a very, very specific, impactful career path that you've chosen, and your purpose is to combat Parkinson's disease. But how did we get there? So let's go back to young Ray, and where you grew up, what family life was like, going through school. What was it like for you?
So I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, so I'm used to my football team losing quite a bit. I still remember, so I'll give you a story. So 1981, 9 years old, I have four brothers, but there are three of us all right one after another, huge Bengals fans. Ken Anderson, Bengals playing Joe Montana in Super Bowl 16.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Pete Johnson, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times, stuffed at the goal line.
Yeah.
Bengals lose Super Bowl. Dorsey boys in tears.
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that. That's probably your only chance.
I know.
Play action would have been nice, I think. Might have been the goal, but it was 1981, so there wasn't much play action.
So the Cincinnati Bengals, the 91 Cincinnati Bengals are watching that Seattle Seahawks Patriots drive. And they're like, we know how you feel.
Yeah,
we know how you feel.
Right
One
there.
other play call would have been the difference in the Super Bowl.
Bootleg, something. Yeah.
Okay, so grew up in Cincinnati, heartbroken at 91. Where do we go from there?
Before that, 81.
81, I'm sorry, 81.
Yeah. Way before his time.
So, both my parents are psychiatrists, so I rebelled and I became a neurologist. That's the big rebellion. So I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. And then, the brain's a pretty cool thing to study. And Parkinson's disease is a very treatable condition, but now it's the world's fastest growing brain disease in the world, even faster than Alzheimer's disease. And my colleagues and I wrote this book because it's titled Ending Parkinson's Disease. But we think the first thing you need to do to any pandemic is to prevent people from becoming further affected, whether that's chronic traumatic encephalopathy for football players. We're not going to cure CTE likely. I hope we do. But, we can prevent a lot of people from ever getting CTE. We can prevent a lot of people from ever getting Parkinson's disease. We can prevent a lot of people from ever getting Alzheimer's disease. And that's what's really burning passion for me as to how to prevent people from ever getting the diseases in the first place.
So when you were a younger kid, was the brain a part of what you wanted to study? I mean, when did you figure out that, listen, I wanted to go into this and be a doctor?
I remember 7 years old, I was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, a doctor. And I said, why? And because my mom and dad are. So it wasn't a very deep thought, but it was deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
And it's really a privilege to be able to do what we do. And I think if you think about it, what's a great gift a doctor can do? Curing diseases is fantastic, but if you can prevent people from ever getting the disease in the first place, what a gift that is. And we don't really do enough of that in American medicine. We try to go from disease to treatment. And we're really thinking now how do we go to disease to cause, and then how do we prevent people from ever getting these things in the first place?
See, that's incredible. I love that. So so you said at 7 you wanted to be a doctor because your parents were. But was that enough? You said it was ingrained in you. Was that enough to really motivate you through school? Was school just kind of easy for you? Were you pushing yourself at that age? Because, the goal is to be a doctor, and I know the work that I have to do because my parents have shared that with me. What was that like?
I would just say, you guys are professional athletes. What are academics? We're professional students. And, I was really good as a student. And I probably still have a great capacity to learn. Unfortunately, a great capacity to forget, but a great capacity to learn. So, school always came pretty easy to me, and I just loved it. I mean, think about it. What better, especially in the environment I am, you get to learn, you get to do really well, and you get rewarded for it. I mean, that's what school is. And, just like you get on the, you get that on the football field, I got that in the classroom. And, that gives you a little high and a little buzz. And I loved it and just kept going with it. And I love to learn.
That's awesome. So you grew up in Cincinnati and you ended up doing your undergraduate at Stanford. What was that move like? So end of the late 80s, early 90s is when you were at Stanford. What was that move from Ohio to the Bay Area of California, Palo Alto?
So in between, I moved from Cincinnati to Southern California. So I went to high school in Newport Beach, California. I went to a school in Cincinnati, Ohio, very insular, private, where, I couldn't even wear this shirt because it's got stripes on it. You were only allowed a blue Oxford or a white Oxford. You guys are looking great. So you're only allowed a blue Oxford or a white Oxford, but you had to have khaki pants or navy pants. You had to have dark shoes with laces and dark socks. And then I went to high school in Southern California, Newport Harbor High School, and then Corona Del Mar High School. And I remember asking the guidance counselor, what's the dress code? You got to figure this out. When we're doing push-ups in the hallway. And he paused, he reflected, and he goes, well, I guess clothes.
Welcome to California.
I learned shoes were optional. Shoes were optional. Tank tops and, shorts were like the
preferred.
Were the thing. So that was I didn't learn much in the classroom in high school. I learned a lot outside the classroom. Yeah. And then I went to Stanford. But that once I had my Southern California experience, the Stanford thing was not too hard.
So was it in Stanford? So let's fast forward to Stanford. Was it at Stanford where you decided that this is the road you wanted to go down, or was it something else that you were heavily involved with?
It was there. It was already there. It was preordained. The only time I deviated, you mentioned I went to business school, and actually I took 2 years out. I worked for a consulting firm for a couple of years instead of doing a residency. So, and for medicine, you go to college, medical school, and then residency, like for neurology or orthopedic surgery. And I took a 2-year detour. That was the only time I took a 2-year detour, which was very surprising to me at the time. But I did that for a couple of years. And then I had this great advice from a neurologist, one of my mentors. He said, I wasn't passionate about what I was doing, and I was making a lot of money, but I wasn't passionate about what I was doing. And he said, you should come back to residency. You won't feel complete unless you do. You won't feel complete unless you do. And so I called my wife, bless her, and I said, what do you think about my going back to residency and, taking a figure off my salary? And, we had a couple kids at the time. And she said, fine. And I did it, and it was the right move. It was the right move to go off for a couple of years, and it was the right move to come back. I had a lot of support to be fortunate to be able to do that.
So for our listeners that are out there, explain to them what residency, because it's a beating. Explain to them what residency means.
Yeah, it's probably like training camp and you don't have a job like in the NFL or something like that. Right. Like where you're like, it's the thing. So I'll tell you, I think the best way to describe it is they put regulations right around when in the midst of my residency that limited you to 80 hours per week of working.
Limited because that was needed. We needed to.
That was what had to be done. And then they thought we were soft. Because I remember my first night on call as an intern. So I took these 2 years out and I came back to medicine. I didn't know anything. You forget everything.
Right.
After 2 years. And I went at 7:00 in the morning and I was on call overnight, which means you stay in the hospital overnight. I was there till 10:00 the next day, having not slept. And so I saw nurses come and go, shifts come and go. So I was like, I literally thought I was going to have a seizure from just being, I was up for 36 some plus hours a day and it was just crazy. It got better once I figured out what I was doing, but it could be that extreme and it's gotten better, but it's still bad and it's still exploitative because, you're getting paid, $40,000. I got $40,000 a year, working 80 hours a week, it's fine, 40,000, but
but when you're going through medical school, right? Like that's not the picture that you have in your head, right? Like I'm going to work my tail off right now to not sleep and make $40,000. And I get it. Like, that's all part of it and you expect it. But that was a perfect analogy, the training camp. Like,
it was.
You're like, when is this going to end? Is this ever going to end?
And like Groundhog Day every day.
And we only make $1,000 a week. And this is a beating over and over.
No autonomy and no control. None. Zero.
Yeah.
Like, you had this pager. You carried this is like, I don't know, you guys remember a pager.
Yes.
You had a pager. You could not go to the bathroom without getting paged. It was just like, it was just messed up.
So where did you do your residency?
University of Pennsylvania. I did one in city, my internship, my first year at Evanston Hospital in Northwestern in Chicago. That was fine. Then the bigger those Mecca hospitals, just like, they're Mecca, football schools, the Hospital University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia at Penn. And I think it was the first teaching hospital in the country. One of the first. And so it was intense, but I had great guys, just like you guys, what gets you through is, you have great camaraderie with these guys. They were all guys in my class and we just had a fantastic time together.
That's awesome. I'm going to take a shot at Philly right now. Philly's going to put something dirty in those hospitals for sure. That was a Dallas Cowboys hate shade on.
And let me tell you,
Philly.
in Philly, they like the administrative, the secretaries knew like who the backup outside linebacker was for the Eagles. It was intense.
That secretary will fight you too.
For sure.
She's a brawler.
Okay, so you go through. at Northwestern. You start there, finish your residency at Penn. Then what was next for you? And your residency was in neurology, correct?
In neurology.
Okay.
And I told you I'm a professional student, so academics are professional students, so it doesn't end. So I did a 2-year fellowship. I came to Rochester, New York, and did a 2-year fellowship studying Parkinson's disease and related things, and learning how to conduct clinical trials and do research. And then I was here for a few years, and I went to Hopkins for 3 years. And then I came back to Rochester, where I am today.
All right. So Ray, what piqued your interest? I keep going back into this, but what piqued your interest into neurology specifically? Not Parkinson's, but just neurology.
I was thinking it was like I was really interested in neuroscience. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And we had a great program at Penn where you did extra psychiatry, extra neurology, and extra neurosurgery. And so when I did that, I was like, neurology or neurosurgery? I loved the intensity of neurosurgery, but even then I knew I had interests that were beyond like what was typical for a neurologist. I mentioned this consulting stuff and stuff like that. And I knew if I do neurosurgery, that was to be an all-consuming thing, and that's all you do. Live, breathe, and eat neurosurgery for 30 years, and I wasn't sure I wanted to live, breathe, and eat neurosurgery for 30 years. So neurology was a nice thing. You got to care for people. I like being with people. You tend to be with older people because that's the demographic, and I kind of like hanging out with older people, and there was a lot of need. And I just outstanding teachers. I mean, you just can't underestimate. You had great coaches, and I think Dave Campbell, like your former, was like
he's a Pennsylvania
college,
guy.
Like, the guy who coached you in college was your head football. I mean, like that. I mean, how much influence has he had on your life? And you get these relationships that you get, and so those are really powerful.
Describe the difference for those that maybe, because I would say it was even for a long time hard for me to distinguish the difference between neurology and your parents' psychiatry or psychology. So describe the difference to listeners and the disorders associated with each.
I would say one is the disorders. So like the psychiatry is more depression, bipolar disorder, substance abuse, schizophrenia, neurology, stroke, seizures, migraines, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS. Lou Gehrig's disease. And then there's an orientation. Psychiatry looks at behavior a lot. Neurologists look at a lot of anatomy. So you damage this part of the brain, you can't move this arm. You damage this part of the brain, you lose memory. You damage this part of the spinal cord, you can't move your legs. So neurology is really, really focused on the anatomy of the brain and the spinal cord and the nerves, and that's kind of how we look at the world. So if we see somebody's can't move their right arm, where does that localize to in the brain? That means that the left part of the brain, some damages to the left part of the brain. So we neurologists are really focused on trying to figure out what a symptom is and tying that to the location of the brain or spinal cord.
How often is there carryover, right? If there's a behavioral, not side effect, but a symptom, behavioral symptom, but it's actually a neurological issue. Like, how often does that cross over, whether it be a tumor or something else?
Yeah, all the time, because these are just artificial ways of looking at the world. It's just like, a defensive back looks at the world much differently than a running back, right? Yeah. You're all playing the same game. But, the defensive back is looking at the quarterback and looking at the wide receiver, and the running back is like, I'm not going to get killed. Yeah, right.
We don't think that. We don't think that. We think about which one of those DBs are we going to run over.
Yeah, that is not the truth. It's fight or flight. Yeah.
And then Alzheimer's disease, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So you get impulsivity, and the neurologist says, well, that's because you're damaging the frontal lobes of the brain. The psychiatrist is like, well, what can we do to modify that? How can we change the behavior? Can we give cognitive behavioral therapy to help them out? So some of these things, they're just two different ways of looking at the world, that neither is better or worse, but they're both complementary, and they're just different orientations, but they overlap all the time.
Okay. That's helpful, because I think right now mental health is at the forefront of our society, right? Especially the last few years. And I'm not going to say it's the platform has just grown, really with the CTE. and then which is a physical neurological ailment. But then mental health, I know like Brandon Marshall is a good buddy of mine. And, he brought awareness back in 2012 and 13 to the mental health side, the bipolar disorder. And now with COVID, right, the mental health is even more on the forefront because of the effects, the side effects that came from isolation, from all the things that COVID brought. So,
and that's one of the questions I do have for you, Doc, is has the mental health aspect been there forever? And why is it all of a sudden that we have started to shed all this light on it right now?
Well, think about what we're doing to ourselves. The worst punishment that humans gives to other humans is solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And what are we doing? I should be hanging out with you in the studio, right? And we'd be, grab lunch and we'd go, play, shoot some hoops or something, right? That's what we would be doing. Right. So we'll do a rain check on that. But for the kids, no kids kids love school, right? Every 5-year-old loves to go to love school. Why do they love school? Not because they're learning that 2 + 2 = 4. I like that, but most kids are because they're going to hang out with their buddies.
Yeah, right.
And they get to make new friends, and they get to socialize, and they get a really nice teacher who cares about them. So I think all those things that we're giving up, I think in some cases we're giving up too much of it. We don't mean to doing as much as we are doing, and it's wreaking havoc. And I think it's wreaking havoc for young kids and for teenagers. I have a teenage boy, I won't go there, but it's just wreaking havoc for all of us. Yeah. And so I think it's just the worst punishment we give to people is solitary confinement. And what are we doing? Trying to get solitary confinement.
So what is the interaction doing to the brain? What is it that I want? Yeah, we got to go down that road. So what's interaction like those kids that are sitting at home all the time? Now they're as opposed to those kids that are like myself and Tyler and how we all grew up. We're out active all the time. Mom had to call us in and say that the lights are going down. You come home. That's it. But what is it? What's the difference there?
So the neurologist would say, what are the neuroanatomical differences that are happening? So one, we can't know because we don't have great ways of measuring it. So we'll just say learning in general. So how do we learn? Is that nerve cells, they're called neurons, make connections to other nerve cells. And in the process of learning, those connections become bigger and more efficient. Mm-hmm. So that's how you react to, when you see a different formation in the backfield, you quickly see it is, and you've learned to be able to recognize that in, half a second. When you're beginning, it takes you 2 seconds to figure it out. And just like, I can look at someone and say they get Parkinson's disease because I look at the way that they hold their hand. I've learned how to do that. When you're not learning, you're not forming those connections between nerve cells in the brain. And, you might be forming other connections that are, really good for playing video games, but they might not be really good for socializing and reading people's faces and carrying on a conversation. I mean, right, we can carry on this conversation not because if we did Zoom all our life, we would probably not be as good at carrying on conversations as we are carrying on conversations because we know what it's like to be in the room, and we can imagine being in the room, and we can imagine, my reaching across the table to do it. So, when we're changing the way we learn and we're learning less, we're making less connections, probably in less valuable parts of the brain that are important for being a happy and functioning, 7-year-old or 17-year-old or 70-year-old.
Man, I never really correlated, right? Because you always think it's an emotional issue, but the physical changes that, the kids over the last few years. And I would say even too, just culturally, I think we were already trending that direction, and then it was just accelerated by COVID, right? Because everything was virtual, everything was text, everything was FaceTime, everything. I mean, it's not like this is all new technology, right? We were already trending in that direction. So in neurology, what is one of the hot things, and I want to get into specifically what you're doing. I want to get a couple of these out of the way, but what is a hot topic that you guys in the whole neurology, and I know you've got a focus on Parkinson's, but what is a hot topic that is at the forefront of research and conversations within, the research community?
So I'll put away aside Parkinson's disease. One thing to know is that brain diseases, neurological disorders, are the leading source of disability in the world. So more than cancer, more than heart disease, more than infectious diseases,
did not know
neurological diseases, stroke, migraine, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease are the leading cause of disability in the world. So if you look at the world and you want to say what's causing the most of disability in the world, it's not infectious diseases, it's not cancer, it's not heart disease, it's not lung disease, it's brain disease. So that's probably the biggest thing. Now, I think a lot of people are like excited, can you take the electrical activity that the brain is, think of it as like a computer, and can you read that with a computer and have your different body parts move? So you guys have probably seen, even probably some football players, they've got paralyzed, and you can like map the electrical activity that's going on in the brain, and then use that electrical activity to move your arm that's previously paralyzed, or move a dot or a cursor on a screen. Can you externalize the brain? I mean, I think that's that's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. Have you heard, and we're totally tangent here, have you heard like Elon Musk's his whole thing, the implant? That is there any validity to that? Is that doable?
So there's this guy named Ray Kurzweil. We're going a little bit far. He's a chief engineer at Google, and he wrote this book maybe 20 years ago called The Singularity, and he viewed that brains and computers would become merged directly together, become one and the same. And so, I think there's a lot more to being human than just the brain and just being a computer. But I think those kinds of things could be happening. There's got a ways to go, but it's out there.
So as we speak, like to brain disease, and you just, man, that woke me up. I didn't know that that was that the numbers were that scary. But is that based on chemicals, pesticides? What is it in the environment that has changed things?
So one, we get older, we're more susceptible to these injuries, and we have less ability to overcome them. Just like, a football player, when you're 7 years old or 8 years old, you sprain your ankle and you're back in you're in good shape, 2 hours later. When you get exposed to these chemicals and pesticides, your ability, A, they take a toll over time, and B, your ability to compensate diminishes over time. So that's aging is a big thing. I think, for Parkinson's disease, and we'll start with there, that a lot of this is man-made. So lung cancer, there was, if you look at the data, there was almost no lung cancer in the United States 100 years ago. I'll say that again. There was almost no lung cancer in the United States 100 years ago. Just didn't exist. It was considered, it was the type of thing that all the doctors would gather around when they had a person with lung cancer, because they never thought they'd see another one. Come around, come see.
Wow.
And then we had cigarettes introduced in the United States in the early 1900s, and 25 years after we had the rise in smoking, you see this beautiful rise in lung cancer. And again, one of the great accomplishments of the last 50 years is we've peaked smoking in the United States. And as soon as we peaked and we go down, 25 years later, you see a decrease in lung cancer. So I think if you think a lot of our diseases are reflective of our society and the society choices that individuals, but more importantly, the choices that society makes. Obesity in 1990 was 10% of Americans. Now it's 30%.
Goodness.
Well, what's that? That's not genetic changes. That's the same gene, same population. That's just a change in our society's values and, what we're feeding our kids and what we allow to be promoted and advertised. So Parkinson's, numerous, I'll back up. Parkinson's, Dr. Parkinson, 1817, describes Parkinson's in London. It wasn't called Parkinson's disease. Then someone else named it after him. And he said, this is something that's not been classified in the medical literature before. He said, this is something new. He's 61 years old. He's been practicing medicine for 30 years. His dad's a doc. So if you're 61, what's going to get you to write a long essay describing 6 people is you got to see something new and something like, hey, I haven't seen this before. And he's describing 6 people, 3 of whom he just really observing walking the streets of London with Parkinson's. Well, what's going on in 1817 in London? It's the height of the Industrial Revolution. England's the capital, and there's something called the London Fog. And the London Fog, I don't know if you guys have been watching The Crown or thing like that. The London Fog has everything to do with air pollution. It was so bad you couldn't even see across the street. People would be walking around covering their mouths and nose because it would burn their mouths and nose. And since that time, numerous products and byproducts of the Industrial Revolution, including air pollution, synthetic man-made pesticides that developed after World War II, industrial chemicals, and heavy metals have all been linked to Parkinson's disease. In areas of the world that are most industrialized, that have the highest rates of air pollution, pesticide use, and chemicals, have the highest rates of Parkinson's disease. Think the United States, Western Europe. Areas that are least industrialized, like sub-Saharan Africa, have the least amounts of Parkinson's disease. Wow. And areas of the world that are undergoing the most rapid industrialization, think China and India, have the fastest increasing rates of Parkinson's disease. And, you put a little lag, 25 years, just like we talk about cigarettes and lung cancer. And so we think to the extent that humans have brought about Parkinson's disease, not all cases, but a large proportion of them, to the extent that we brought about Parkinson's disease, we can end it and we can prevent it. We can prevent people from ever getting Parkinson's disease in the first place. I always say, I don't want to be cured of cancer. I just don't want to get cancer in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
It's like for you guys, it's like, I don't want to be cured of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. I don't want to get in the first place.
Right.
And so what can we do as a society and as individuals to prevent ourselves from ever getting, these diseases, whether it's Parkinson's or CTE or COVID? We don't have cure COVID. We prevent COVID. We don't cure it even, 2 years into this. So that's what we try to do is, what can we do to prevent people from ever getting the diseases in the first place?
So as the brain is concerned, what does Parkinson's, describe Parkinson's disease?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. So Parkinson's classically, when Dr. Parkinson described it, has 3 or 4 main features. One's usually a rest tremor in somebody's hand. Second is slowness in movement. You're really slow in doing things. Third is stiffness. And fourth is difficulty walking. So like, people who have been brave enough and shared their stories, Michael J. Fox, right. Muhammad Ali, Brian Grant, former NBA basketball player, Davis Finney, former Olympian cyclist, Tour de France winner, Alan Alda in the NFL, Forrest Gregg, head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals in Super Bowl 16, died with Parkinson's disease. So those are that's what Parkinson's high level. It really turned out the neat thing, the really smart German pathologist 2003 said, Parkinson's disease doesn't begin in the brain. Parkinson's disease is fundamentally not a brain disease. Parkinson's disease begins outside the brain. Parkinson's disease begins either in the nose or the gut and then spreads to the brain and causes all these neurological problems. And so you say, well, the nose and the gut, well, what's that got to do with Parkinson's disease? Well, that's where air pollution, pesticides, industrial chemicals, and inhaled heavy metals, they're either enter in through the nose, or pesticides, or contaminated groundwater are consumed through the gut. And so that the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's disease aren't tremor, they're actually loss of smell and constipation. So people develop a loss of smell and constipation 20 years before the tremor appears. So that's really insight. 2003, Heiko Brock said, hey guys, Parkinson's disease, we all think it's a brain disease. It's actually not. The disease actually begins in the nose, for many people, begins in the nose or the gut. And oh, by the way, that's where these environmental pathogens, disease-causing factors enter the body. And oh, by that's where the earliest symptoms of the disease are apparent.
So what does it do once it gets to the brain? The neurological effect, right? You said constipation, loss of smell, but neurologically, what does it do within the brain?
So classically, it leads to loss of nerve cells that produce a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And so dopamine is responsible for controlling motor function. And it's in a particular circuit in the brain that controls movement. So they have a lot of trouble initiating movement and a lot of trouble stopping movement. So if you see people with Parkinson's disease, they're shuffling their feet often very, really, really, really fast, and they have a hard time starting to walk. If you ever seen the movie Awakenings with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams, you have the person's walking and they get stuck and they can't move their feet, and they have a lot of time stopping it. So they have a lot of trouble with their motor function because that circuit is affected. As I alluded to, it's not just that motor circuit that's affected, but there are lots of other circuits, including the circuits that affect depression and mood and anxiety. There are circuits that affect memory and cognition, which are affected later in the disease. So as the disease marches its way through from the nose and gut to the lower parts of the brain to the higher parts of the brain, you see other symptoms develop.
Want to take a quick break from the episode and tell you guys about a brand new partnership. Because you guys listen to the podcast, companies are now coming to us and wanting to be a part of this. Yeah. And that's 100% because of you guys. So wanted to tell you about an exciting new partnership.
Man, this is a great partnership, and it's a long-time friendship that I've had with Choctaw Casino and Resort, located in Durant, Oklahoma, just across the Red River here. Easy drive, great people, great resort. The new renovations going on. Got a fantastic pool that's outside. So if you got kids, if you have kids, or if you just want to get away alone with your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, your partner, doesn't matter what it is, go over to Choctaw Casino and Resort. Have a great time. Again, we always talk about relationships on this podcast. We have a great relationship with Walter Allen, who's over there, and the people over at Choctaw Casino have just been wonderful.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't have a wife and a girlfriend at the same time.
Hey, a little bit of both, but have a good time anyway.
But yeah, like Darren said, go check them out. Choctaw Casino and Resort. Now back to the episode.
That is something.
So, okay, I think this is intriguing because, yes, we're speaking specifically to Parkinson's right this moment, but I want to marinate on the fact of our environment, what we're consuming, what we are surrounding ourselves with, the life that we're living is causing not just Parkinson's, but I mean, there are so many other diseases that we are now introducing because of our lifestyle. So let's talk about preventative actions as parents. And so 2 parents here, right. What can we be doing to be aware so that, okay, not only are we preventing Parkinson's, but also other diseases that are lurking everywhere?
Listen, you guys are both athletes. If you want to, the benefits of sports and athletics is just overwhelmingly positive. For Parkinson's disease, people who are physically active at my age, I'm in your age, in their 40s and 50s, 3.5 to 4 hours of running or swimming a week decreases your risk of Parkinson's by 20%.
Jeez.
3.5 to 4 hours of vigorous exercise a week in your 40s and 50s decreases your risk of ever developing Parkinson's disease by 20%. That's like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
And that's just Parkinson's. That also holds true for Alzheimer's disease. That holds probably even more true for cardiovascular disease, for cancer. Why we view sports and athletics, just PE, as optional is crazy, right? That should just be core to, there should be a sport for every person and every person in a sport. Full stop. Sport for every person and every person in a sport. And that we should be doing that for kids. And, we're not doing it in COVID. Just like, you can go outside, you're not going to get COVID by and large. So I think that's a big thing. Pesticides, since writing this book, I buy a lot more organic. Pesticides are nerve toxins. They target the parts of energy-producing parts of cells that we know are damaged in Parkinson's. Some dissolve in fat, so the brain is fatty, and so it gets into the brain. So we need to, I buy a lot more organic. I wash all my fruits and vegetables, and we need to tell the EPA that we need to get rid of dangerous, toxic pesticides that we know increase the risk for Parkinson's, that we know increase the risk for cancer, that we know increase the risk for ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease. We need to, call on our government to represent and make our food safe for us. Those are things. I can go on. Head trauma is a big issue for Parkinson's disease, for ALS. We will talk about football, but if you're biking, you should wear a helmet. If you're skiing, you should wear a helmet. Everyone puts a seatbelt on, and no one's like, it's all bent out of shape in a car, and that saves lots of lives.
Right.
So there are lots of things that we can do, both as individuals and as society, to decrease our risk of Parkinson's and a wide range of other conditions.
So I wanted to go down that road because this is one of the reasons I really wanted to get on this interview with you, was the effects of playing football or a violent sport where the head trauma is involved, whether it be football or MMA, boxing, or just boxing as well. Yeah. I mean, what's your thought process on allowing an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, a young kid to play football starting at the age of 8?
Yeah, I'd be concerned. So if you guys haven't, every NFL player should read this paper. So I'm going to show you that this paper, if you guys haven't read it, you should read it. So this is I think the most important paper. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
This is the most important paper for every NFL player concerned about chronic traumatic encephalopathy should read it. And you should invite Dr. Ann McKee right down here, Ann McKee from Boston University. You should have her on your show. She's outstanding. So in 2017, not too long ago, they looked at the brains of 202 people who had volunteered to donate their brains who had played football. 202 people donated their brains to evaluate their brains after they died. Of that 202, 177 had chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So of the 202, 177, 87% had chronic traumatic encephalopathy. These are people who volunteer to give their brains. So it's not just a random sample. So this is limited in that respect. Of that, there were 111 NFL players of this 202. 110, 99% had chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Wow.
Nothing in science gives you 99%.
Wow.
So only to give you a flavor, only 10% of smokers develop lung cancer, but 110 of 111 NFL football players develop chronic traumatic encephalopathy in this study.
How many people operate with CTE that may not see symptoms or may not feel the effects or even know until postmortem?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't have it, but in this study, a large proportion of people did have symptoms of the disease. And in the study, the more you play football, so like the NFL players were more likely to have CTE and more likely to have symptoms than even the high school players. So in this study, I think they looked at 17 high school players, just played high school, no more. And even 3 of those 17, 20% of the people in high school only had CTE in their brains.
So, okay, and bringing it real here. So I played football for 28 years of my life. When do you really start to see that decay in functionality of the brain, or you really start to see those effects? Because I'm 5 years out of retirement. I would, and who knows, right? I don't have anything to compare it personally to. This is kind of how I've felt like my life has just gone, and I still feel very functional. But when is it when I should start to say, okay, hey, these are things that I need to start paying attention to, and then I've got a follow-up question after that.
Wow.
And I know this is not your area of expertise, so I don't want to put that on you, and maybe that's an unfair question.
So in the study, the average age at death, right? These are all people who didn't have their brains after, was like around 66. My guess is people were experiencing symptoms in their 40s and 50s. Ann McKee will tell you exactly when, but that's when I think people would start experiencing it.
So on the show, we really do talk about maximizing the life that we've been given. And making sure that we are, like you said earlier, continuing to learn, but continuing to grow. So from a mental health and brain health standpoint, you mentioned exercise, you mentioned eating organic. Is there anything else? Because there's the concept of functional neurology, and I don't know your opinion on that, but that we can actually help build our brain like a muscle.
Yeah. So so I told you about exercise, 20% decreased risk. Mediterranean diet, high in fruits and vegetables, low in animal products, can also decrease your risk of Parkinson's disease by likely 20%. Less robust evidence, and everything I say for Parkinson's disease also extends to likely to Alzheimer's disease and ALS. But you're just talking to a Parkinson's expert, so I look at the world through a defined lens. It's like Parkinson's. The other thing is sleep. So there was a really good study suggesting that people who sleep, I think, more than 7 hours a day are less likely to develop dementia than people who don't. So that's another big thing. Can I go to the football thing for a little bit?
Yes, go. Yes.
So, your whole thing is freedom, right? The whole thing Darren Woodson shows, like you have this great piece on freedom. I think professional athletes should be able to participate in their sports and be free from developing neurological complications.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be having sports that are putting 110 out of 111 people to develop chronic traumatic encephalopathy. We should modify, as a neurologist, we should modify sports so that we decrease the risk of people developing, long-term complications of it. People should be professional athletes and be free from having significant adverse health consequences. I mean, I don't think anyone gets bent out of shape if a swimmer is going to develop a little bit of a sore shoulder when they're, 50 or 60 years old. But, you'd like to be able to know your name and, interact with your family members and not worry about being hyper impulsive or aggressive or moody or acting out your dreams or being demented because of a sport, because of your being a professional athlete in a particular sport.
Yeah.
We need to make professional athletes should be able to have the freedom from long-term health consequences because of their activity.
Okay, so how does that? We need to go down this road.
Here we go.
Okay, so we all understand that the NFL is the biggest sport in America, right? I mean, it is what it is, and it's a violent sport. How do you see there being changes within a sport that is so popular and a lot of money's being made off that sport? What are you seeing as far as the changes that could be made?
Yeah, so again, I'm not an athlete on a football thing. One, I would say it's a little bit concerning that we're having other sports emerge that are having even more violence toward the brain that are emerging, and I think we should think about it. I'm kind of surprised that flag football and things like that haven't taken off quite as much. Wouldn't it be really cool to see Darren Woodson, trying to chase down AJ Green and get his flag? I mean, I think that would
now
be...
you're playing into Darren's weaknesses. Put him in the open field. Take the contact out of it.
I'm too old. Dr. Ray, I'm out.
So, I think we got to think about how it's done. I know they're working on helmets. And I know they're working on different things. And, the special teams. And, there's some things that are like out because it's just a little bit crazy to have someone running down 25. So you can make some modifications. But I think you could just think about different ways of doing the sports to do it, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
Chris Borland, we talk about in the book, Chris Borland, linebacker, San Francisco 49ers, right? Was an all rookie or whatever. And then he retired after his rookie year because he said, I've seen the evidence, I've heard the stories, and thanks, but no thanks, even though this is what I love to do.
Yeah.
I think if you love to, it's great that I think sports are a huge part of society, a huge benefit. I just said that every person should be engaged in a sport and there should be a sport for every person. We just shouldn't be having sports that are going to cause, 110 of 111 football players to have chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. And take your neurologist hat off and put your fan hat on. And I think that's the question is like, okay, would I still engage with this sport? Would this still be the entertaining sport if we took X, Y, and Z out of it that make it? And I agree with you. I think the game needs to change. We know too much. Yeah. Absolutely. I think the technique has to be cleaned up. And there's avenues out there. There's this flex football concept that's in between flag and tackle that gives you kind of a soft shell helmet so that you can't use your head as a weapon. I mean, there's certain things that I think are on the horizon. There's just a question is what's the public reaction, right? The public's calling for it, but are they going to like the results of it?
So just give you an example, NBA. Far less violent than it used to be. Kevin McHale taking out Kurt Rambis. Kevin McHale, that would be the end of Kevin McHale. It just didn't happen. And, we got Steph Curry, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It changes. No, that's a great point, right? Different athletes, different styles. It all evolves. And that's a great point. Yeah, because like the 90s Detroit Pistons would never, ever – they wouldn't have a roster 5 minutes into the first quarter. Yeah. So, okay. So I want to get back to Parkinson's and I want to talk about your book and how you mentioned some things to prevent it, but what are we doing from a research to actually treat the disease for people that currently are experiencing it?
Yeah, so there's 1.2 million Americans who have the disease right now. 200 people will be diagnosed today, including a couple people while we're just talking right now. 100 people will die with the disease today. 100 Americans will die with Parkinson's today. So we need to come up with, in addition to preventing people from ever getting it in the first place, we need to come up with better treatments. There are some genetic causes. About 15% of people, 10-15% of people with Parkinson's have genetic causes, and we're developing gene-directed therapies. So just like in cancer, we have gene-directed therapies. There are gene-directed therapies and Parkinson's that are in the pipeline. Turns out that Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease and, quite frankly, chronic traumatic encephalopathy see these misfolded proteins that are found in the brain. And so there's actually, just like we immunize against the spike protein in COVID-19. We have immunizations against the COVID-19. There are now trying to develop immunizations, vaccines against Parkinson's disease, vaccines against Alzheimer's disease. You could even imagine vaccines against chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Wow. Those are still early stages, but we just had this great therapeutic breakthrough in terms of developing a vaccine within 1 year of a new virus emerging. Can we apply that know-how and that great success story, one of the great accomplishments in the history of medicine, at least since I've been in medicine? Can we apply that to the leading source of disability in the world, brain diseases? And I think there could be a lot of promise to be had there.
So,
go ahead.
I'll say research on the human brain is tough because access to the brain, to actually see it in action and see it, obviously the CT, it's post-mortem. Now we get to study it after the fact. What are some technologies that are evolving, or are there any that help neurologists and researchers really dig in and understand the brain at a higher level? Because do you disagree that we still have a ton to learn about the human brain? Yeah, no, we're way behind. So, if you want to know if you have heart disease, you can go to the doctor and get a blood test and measure your cholesterol, and you can be told what to do about that. Relatively straightforward. If you want to know if you have HIV, there's a test to tell you we have HIV, and you can evaluate, the level of virus in the blood go down with treatment, and you can measure it and find out. You can't really do that for Parkinson's disease, and it's really hard to do it for other brain diseases. Imaging is the biggest area, in the last 20, 30, 40 years, is that you can image the brain, and you've probably seen pictures of people with chronic traumatic encephalopathy in vivo, while they're still living. You can see lots of just the volume of the brain has shrunk in people with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So imaging has been our biggest tool for better assessing the brain. Imaging, though, usually just gives you a static look at the brain. So, you do an ultrasound and echocardiogram of the heart, you can see the heart, pumping and the like. We have no really good functional assays of the brain other than, something called an EEG for seizures. So we really can't see the brain function as well as we'd like to do, and certainly as well as we can do for other parts of the body. So
I want to get a little personal here. My pastor at the church just announced that he had Parkinson's about 6-7 months ago. And of course, through ignorance, I didn't know to the extent of what that looked like. So, I did my own little research, but tell us what would be his, are there different levels, or is it, what are some of the things that he's going to have to go through here in the next months to treat Parkinson's, and can he treat it? So one, sorry to hear about that. Two, you'll connect me to your pastor, and I'm happy to help him out. Absolutely. Three, people can function at a really, really high level for 5 to 10 years with Parkinson's, and sometimes even more. Michael J. Fox had Parkinson's now for 30 years, and I think he's written 3 books and been on 2 new shows all since he's had it. Janet Reno, I don't remember, was the former Attorney General of the United States. Yeah. She had Parkinson's and served as Attorney General. Pope John Paul II, for your pastor, had Parkinson's disease, and, the last few years of his life were really troubling. But, he probably had Parkinson's for more than 10 years and was highly effective as a pope. For it. Brian Grant, the former former NBA basketball player, likely had Parkinson's while he was still playing in the NBA. Wow. This guy, Rich Clifford, did a spacewalk at age 43, 2 years after he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So if you can do a spacewalk, if you can be an attorney general, if you can be a pope, and you can write books, and you can play in the NBA all with Parkinson's disease. Brian Grant didn't have a great year, but you can function at a high level. Exercise is hugely beneficial, not only to prevent Parkinson's disease, but but beneficial for people with the disease. Numerous studies have shown that bicycling, swimming, vigorous exercise helps people with Parkinson's disease. So that's what your pastor should do, at least an hour a day. And I mentioned Parkinson's is loss of these dopamine-producing nerve cells in the brain.
The most effective medication, which is quite effective, is something called levodopa, which is just a precursor to that dopamine. And so people with Parkinson's disease can really function with that medicine and exercise and appropriate care at a really high level for the first 5 to 10 years of disease. The problem with these diseases is they get worse over time. The nerve cells continue to die off, and therefore you need more and more medication. The more and more any medication you take, the more and more adverse effects, side effects you get of that medication, and the disease can be quite disabling, especially over the long term. But people, especially the first 5 to 10 years in general, can function at a really high level with the disease and lead productive lives as a pastor, as an actor, as an athlete.
What about caffeine, and what about what's the artificial sweetener that
It's aspartame. So
aspartame? Yes,
yeah. So caffeine, it turns out, decreases your risk of developing Parkinson's disease and might be helpful. So this is your excuse to have your 1 to 4 cups of caffeinated coffee or tea or chocolate. If you're like me, that could be beneficial. Caffeine has its own side effects, anxiety and headaches and stuff like that. But it can be beneficial. Artificial sweeteners probably, to my knowledge, have no role in Parkinson's disease.
Okay.
But I've grown really skeptical of some of the things we do to ourselves and some of the things that we eat since writing this book.
Yeah. And I think that, you talked about pesticides and the effects that those have, but what about these processed foods and the amount and whether that leads to obesity,
so obesity is again, we're doing it to ourselves. 10% U.S. obesity in 1990, right? So when you're playing college football at ASU, 10% of people obese. Now it's over 30%. There are lots of things that we can see in our society, that we can see in our kids' school. I was at the University of Alabama. My brother is a psychiatrist in Alabama. And I was flabbergasted at the flagship school for Alabama, how many people I saw that were 15 to 50 pounds overweight at age 19. And then I was like, why is this? And then I went to the student union. The student union was essentially only fast food.
Crap food. Oh.
Yeah.
And that's where every kid was eating, not every day, but multiple meals a day in the student union. And I'm like, you're a university. Why are we doing this? And, even my hospital does it. We have Pepsi machines in the hospital cafeteria.
Right.
We're just making some really fundamentally bad decisions that are having enormous adverse consequences, for the best and brightest, right?
Yeah,
This is the best and brightest of Alabama, and we're pumping them full of fast food.
And that's the reason why we do this show. This is the reason why. What you just said right now, Doc, is the reason why we do this show, because a lot of people are just not aware, specifically young kids or parents are just not aware of what they're doing by ordering fast foods, by going to places where their kids are drinking soda. We give kids the access to this, right? So, go ahead.
Yeah, and we're doing it. And Alabama's got a lot of farmers who would love to sell their crops and feed their kids to have healthy lives, right?
Right.
And how about helping the economy of Alabama? Do multinational corporations really need the money from the University of Alabama students? Come on.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Well, I know we're running up against your deadline here, but I do want, for those that talk about your book, is this a book for someone that, okay, hey, we need to, Parkinson's is, whether I know someone or I already have it, or is this a book that should be read by just everyone in order to prevent it, in order to make sure that this is not a disease that affects me and my family?
So one, it's written for the general audience. So it's not technical. We have 800 references. So if you want to go techie and you want to go geek, you can, but it talks about Chris Borland. It talks about Muhammad Ali. It talks about Forrest Gregg. It talks about Michael J. Fox. It tells everything's told through stories. So it's about stories of regular people from all different parts of the world and their experiences with Parkinson's, everything from researchers to patients with the disease. So it's written for everyone. Second, any of your listeners who can't afford the book, they're just going to email me at info@endingpd.org, info@endingpd.org, and we'll send them a copy for free. Just give us your mailing address and we'll send you a copy for free.
I love that.
If anyone has questions about Parkinson's, they can just email us and we'll answer them. info@endingpd.org. We're happy to do so. Anyone's got stories, football players, athletes who want to share their story, we love to hear them because we learn from you.
I love that.
So the book is written for everyone because even if you don't have Parkinson's disease, my lifetime risk of developing Parkinson's as a relatively healthy doc is 1 in 15, which is six. My lifetime risk of dying in a car accident is 1 in 100. So, I wear seatbelts and I drive a safe car and airbags and all that good stuff. My lifetime risk as a doc with no really significant family history of the disease is 1 in 15.
Yeah.
And, I just assume not have Parkinson's disease, and my wife would just assume I don't have Parkinson's.
That's right. Yeah.
Either. So that's what we really want to do is highlight how we can prevent and end the disease. And we give really 25 actions on what we can do to prevent and end Parkinson's.
One question real quick here before we get off here. Will we ever defeat Parkinson's disease?
100%. We can do it. We've done it. So your father, both your parents grew up around polio. Yeah. And polio shut down community centers in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And then what happened, what changed the course of polio was FDR may have had the disease, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And they started a March of Dimes in 1938 that literally flooded the White House with dimes. They could shut down the entire White House. We talk about in the book. Raised millions of dollars for Jonas Salk and later Albert Sabin to develop a vaccine in 1954. 16 years after the March of Dimes, polio was, we had a vaccine, and polio is eradicated from the United States and nearly eradicated from the entire world. You and I there's not even a polio treatment.
Yeah, right.
There's not even a polio doctor in the U.S. because no one's got polio, by and large. 1980s, not so long ago, another virus was uniformly and rapidly fatal, unidentified, unknown. And then a group of activists in New York City and San Francisco made their voices heard. They created something called ACT UP. They said for people with HIV, silence equals death. That was silence equals death. And they changed the course of it. Think Magic Johnson. When Magic Johnson was diagnosed, everyone thought he was going to die. Yeah. Here he is, how many more championships later, how many different businesses, the man's amazing. And they changed the course. And for Parkinson's, silence equals suffering. So we've addressed it with polio. We've addressed it with HIV. How many millions of us don't have HIV because of the bravery and the courage of those activists? I mean, think about that, right? That we don't have it. Right. We're not treated. We just don't have it because, they figured out the safe sex practices and condoms are widely used. Wear a condom. And then, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, a third example. They realized that the goal of Mothers Against Drunk Driving who suffered unspeakable harm, right, to their families. They didn't say we need more trauma centers and better ambulances. They say we need to stop drinking and driving. Right. And drinking and driving is socially unacceptable right now. For your kids, it was just like, it's like the worst. I mean, it's like, who would think about drinking? You don't even need to discuss it as a parent. Right. It's like, because they already know. So 3 great examples of where in history, when people have made their voices heard, really had huge courage. We need to follow the courage of the Michael J. Foxes, the Brian Grants, the David Spinneys of the world, and make our voices heard and stop Parkinson's disease and stop chronic traumatic encephalopathy and make the world better, not just for our generation, but for all subsequent generations.
Right. I love that. Yeah. And I love that stance because that goes against our healthcare system really as a whole, right? The revenue is
prevent disease.
The revenue is generated treating disease, not preventing it. Yep. And I love your mindset. And if you take anything away from this, whether it's cancer, whether it's Parkinson's, whether it's Alzheimer's, they are preventable by how you take care of your body, what you consume, how you move. There are so many things that you can do to lower your risk and ultimately eradicate these diseases. So thank you for sharing.
Dr. RayDorsey, one more time, how can we find you?
Info@endingpd.org. If you have a question, anything about Parkinson's, let us know. Mr. Woodson, you'll connect your pastor to me. We'll be happy to set him up and take care of them. Anyone can't afford the book, we're delighted to send you a free copy. Info@endingpd.org, and delighted to come back on the show and do it in person.
Yes, next time for sure. For sure. You're going to come with great news too next time for sure.
Outstanding. Thank you, guys.
Thanks again.